in 1961. I then went to work for him, and we were doing something very unique in 1961. We were creating a multi-programming system around a mini computer and a disk drive that would support up to 20 experiments around the face of a nuclear reactor. Now, there wasn't one computer that would do all that. Everybody who needed the power of the reactor to run their experiment needed to have their own computer, because the electrons and so forth come flying out of there pretty quick. You can't do it without them. Fitzwater was an X-ray crystallographer, which means he would take substances, bounce electrons off of them, measure the deflection angle, and determine what the substance was made of. And that was his specialty. So he said, we can buy a bigger mini computer and we can put a language on it, an operating system, so 20 different people could control their experiments at the same time. This was unheard of in 1961. And so I worked with him on that project, and it seemed like it made sense. During that time frame, I went to a users group meeting of Scientific Data Systems mini computers. I believe it was in Southern California. And we still lived in Ames at that time. And I met a gentleman by the name of Bob Bernard. And in April 1965, there was a phone call at our house, Monday when I was at work. And Susan answered the phone, and somebody said, my name is Don Ryan. You remember that name. He says, I'm from California and I want to interview your husband for a job. And she says, very funny. Click. He calls back and he says, please don't hang up, lady, please don't hang up. I do want to talk to him. She said, when do you want him there? I promised Susan 2 years in Ames. Okay, we're working on 6.5 by then. And we had 2 kids, both of which are sitting here this morning, that wanted their snowsuits on to go outside. Then they had to go to the bathroom, so they had to come back. Then they wanted to go out. So Susan was pretty much fed up with the winter by that point in time. So she said, when do you want him there? I said, well, it'd be nice if he flew out this weekend. She said, he'll be there. I came home for dinner and she says, you're going to California on Saturday. And I said, who's paying for the ticket? I was a little naive at the time. And she said, they didn't say anything. And I said, So I called them up and they said, oh, by the way, we always fly first class, so buy a first class ticket, we'll reimburse you for you when you get here. So off I went to California, flew first class for the first time in my life, went out for the interview, and I got passed around between Don Ryan and the head of that company was a guy from South Dakota by the name of Jim Dunlap from Vermilion. And when I got done talking to Jim, he passed me back to Don. He says, give him a good offer. And Ryan sat there and fidgeted around with some of the papers that were in his desk drawer, and he didn't know what that meant. He knew I was making $9,500 at the time. And so he fidgeted around for a while, and he finally says, how does 13.5 sound? I said, that's it, I'm rich. That's how much I do, you know. So we were living in Ames, Iowa. Well, 13.5 would have been rich in Ames, Iowa. But he said, well, you can go to either Connecticut, where we're opening a new office with Bob Bernard, or you can come to California. So Susan and I talked about it, and she said, well, let's go to California. I always wanted to go back. And I said, look, let's do this. Let's go to Connecticut. Neither one of us have ever lived on the East Coast near New York, and this will be an opportunity to see lots of things, and we'll decide what we're going to do. And in one way or another, if it doesn't work out with this company, I'll quit, and we'll go to California and get a job. I'd already had a job when I graduated from college from IBM and TRW, and turned both of them down. They were more money, but they didn't have as interesting work as Fitzwater did. So she believed me on that, so we took off in June of that year and drove to the East Coast. And that worked a lot. That company grew a little bit. The time I interviewed Digitech, there were 12 employees. By the time I went to work on June 15th, there were 45. So the mini computer industry was going nuts at the time. Digitech specialized in producing compilers. These are language translators that people use to write in Fortran or COBOL or PL1 or C in order to write their application. Somebody has to translate that into the machine instructions, and that's what Digitech did. And that's what I've been doing at Iowa State. So that's the reason that they saw me and came after me. Well, things went along pretty well for a while. I was there. We had a couple other people in the office in Connecticut. One guy was going to law school at the same time, so he wasn't really focused on his job. I was, and I was doing my normal 8 to to 16 hours a day working on things. And so finally the phone call came from California, and they said, come on out, we want to have a meeting on Sunday. What's it about? Well, just come on out. You and Bob come out. So we came out, we had a meeting on Sunday, a very short meeting, and the president, who was always interested in quick actions, he said, your guys aren't making any money. Dave's the only one in your office making money for the company. So you got to fix that. And so we went back to the hotel, and Bob said, they're getting nervous. You got to back me up. You got to back me up, because this is important. We got to keep this going. And I said, well, he was still working on his previous job at PerkinElmer part of the time and charging them a real low consulting rate, so he wasn't making any money. The one guy was going to law school. The other guy had just been there a couple of months, and he was from Lithuania or someplace, I think. And so the next morning we went in, and he said, you guys go back to Connecticut. That was our first meeting. The second morning he says, go to Connecticut and call me up with something that you're going to do, like fire everybody and start over. So Bob really got nervous, and on the way home he says, you got to back me up. He said, I could get 10% of this company if I generate more profit in Connecticut than they generate in California. I'll give part of it to you. I said, well, we'll have to see what happens. Well, that was on Monday we flew back, and on Friday we were down at a data center in New Jersey, and the phone rang, and I got on the phone, and Ryan said, is Bob in the room? I said, no, he's in punching some cards in the other room. He said, if we close the office, will you move to California? And I said, absolutely. He says, let me talk to Bob. So I went and got Bob. He says, Bob, we're closing the office next Friday. We'd like you and Dave to come to California and fire the other people. So Bob said, you got to stay here, Dave. This was the first really good opportunity I had to strike it rich in life so that I didn't have to work. And Bob said, we're going to start a new company, and to hell with these guys. He said, you come here, and we'll start a new company. So what are we going to do, Bob? Well, we're not sure, but there's this guy that I know. We've been talking about doing this for a long time, and we'll do it, and you can be a partner. And I said, but Bob, when's it going to happen? He said, in the next year. I said, Bob, I thought I was rich at 13.5. In Connecticut, I'm in the slums at 13.5. Everybody works in New York and works on Wall Street. I didn't have enough money to barely make evens. He said, well, I'll loan you the money. I said, Bob, I really can't do it. I got to go to California. Well, that was a mistake. I would have retired at 30, 5 years later, had I gone with Bob. He started a company called National CSS, sold it to Dun & Bradstreet, and which is yet another funny story, but we can't do them all today, or we won't get time for dinner. So I took off to California, and he went ahead and did his thing, and I went to work for Digitech, and they continued to grow, and at one point along the way, Wells Fargo was interested in one of the acquisitions that Digitech had made. And it was a company that managed inventory for a distributor, for Western liquor distributors, I believe was the name of the company. And they bought that company, and of course Wells Fargo was real interested in that. They were more interested in that. They were in software. And so they continued on, and the computer industry started to slow down. In the 60s, everybody was coming out with a computer. Bunker Ramo, people you've never heard of other than you've heard their names, but you've never heard of in the computer business. Then by the end of the 60s, it started to slow down. Well, I didn't pay much attention to anything like that. I was now running that division at Digitech that was producing compilers, and we'd shrunk back down to 6 people, and we had about 4 contracts that we were with various processes. We had a bunch of contracts we'd had with IBM over the years that we had warranty responsibilities for. And so at that point in time, the Dunlap had left the company and Ryan had left the company, and they put a president in there by the name of Herbert Henry III. Hoover. He was known as Pete Hoover. Herbert Henry Hoover, right, the third. He came in and he rode in on his Harley from San Marino with his brain bucket on to go to work every day. And we were working at the marina at that time, and he was sort of running the company. And Ryan, my partner to be, was 11 years older than I was, and I was talking to him, and he said, "Why don't we just start our own company? We can program better than most everybody else in the world. We'll start our own company to do what we're going to do." And so I went back and I approached Pete, and I said, "Pete, Don Ryan and I would like to buy this small division of 6 programmers." And he said, you know, $1 million up front, 6 people weren't doing very much business at that time, and 1% of the revenue for the first 5 years. So I went to Ryan, and Ryan said, he's smoking something funny, because it's not worth that. So I went back and gave my notice, and Pete said, you aren't going to negotiate? I said, we're not even in the same zip code. I probably didn't say that. I don't think we had zip codes at the time. I said, we're so far apart, it's not worth talking. So I'm out of here in a month. And he was just totally shocked. So I left and went to work for a company that we founded called Ryan McFarland Corporation. The founding date of that company was July 7th, 1970. 7-7-70. Now, we had a good friend who was in the advertising businesses. That's got to be luck. Look at all those 7s in a row. He said, but I'm not sure what the 0 at the end means. So we started, we completed the contracts we had. We brought over 2 or 3 programmers. That first year, I spent like January and March in Sweden. Not the time to go to Sweden. Don't go then. The sun comes up at 10 and it leaves about 1:30. So we continued to work, and we got down to pretty soon we had no more programmers, a small amount of revenue. Now, why did Pete come back to us and say, why don't you take over the company, the division? IBM had called for some warranty work. He had nobody who could do it. I was the only guy who could warrant the IBM project. So that's why he knuckled down. We got it for nothing up front, 12% revenue the first year, which wasn't very good because the recession was underway, and 10% the revenue the second year. Had 3 kids at the time who were very young. The oldest, I think, was Kim, which was probably about 9 at the time, and Jeff was 7, and Jill was probably 2. And we became involved in the foster parent program. We went to somebody's house for dinner, and the daughter was introduced to, this is our daughter. And I said, gee, your daughter really looks a lot like you. And she said, it shouldn't. She said, why? She said, she's a foster child. What's a foster child? So we learned all about that. We got involved in that. That's a subject in detailed depth for another time. 1971, summertime, no employees, no business. We piled all the kids in the car, and off we went to Estes Park, Colorado on vacation, on credit cards. Okay? You still had to go on a vacation with your family, even though you had no money and no income. During that time, we started another company that did billing processes for orthodontists, basically managing their contract. And that had grown a little bit, but it wasn't enormously successful. Well, we finally got a turnaround in 1972 when somebody called and said, I'm going to be at LAX tomorrow. I want you and Ryan to come down and talk to me. I said, okay. So we went home, we got on our suits and our jackets, and we went down to the airport. And he said, I want you guys to do a project for ITT Europe in Paris. We said, okay. We talked to him for a few minutes. I said, is there anything else you need to know about us before you make your decision? Already made the decision. Already did research on you guys. I know what you've done, and I know who you are, and we want you to do that. I want you to show up over in Paris in a month and start working. And he pointed to Don. In a month, contract hadn't come. Ryan says the guy's a flake. The guy is a flake. I'm not going to Paris till we get a contract. So this went on for several months, and finally he said, come on over, you can sign the contract when you get here. So that was a turnaround. Over the years we had more contracts from IBM and NCR and many companies during the 70s. We had over 20 contracts with IBM on different computers of different sizes over that period, over a 28-year period. And we had several contracts with NCR, who was trying to get into the computer business, and a lot of work with ITT Europe, both in England, Spain, and in France. In 1984, another good thing happened to us. The company was starting to grow a little bit, and we had more employees, and a company by the name of Sequoia Technologies Limited Partners, venture company, called up and said, Don Valentine said, why don't I own part of your company? So I don't know. Why don't you? He said, well, come on up and let's talk about it. Well, he had done Apple, he had done all of the big companies in Silicon Valley and made himself $1 zillion for sure. So we went up and talked to him, and so we took some venture money in, Some of it went into our pockets, which seemed like a good idea, and some of it went into the company. And we said, well, and Ryan, who was very much naive in investing, said, what should we do with the money we got? And he said, well, I've got a new fund called Sequoia Technologies 4. And he said, why don't you, and what does that cost to get in that? He says, $100 grand. And Ryan says, can we split a share? If he was alive today, I'd kill him. It turned out that the big high flyer in that turnaround company was Cisco Systems in 1984. I still have a little bit of Cisco left, but I've harvested a bunch of it. My cost per share is 0.00016 cents. Okay, so that was a real good thing that happened to us. Over the next 15 years, up till 1997, 98, we tended to add more people in offices. By 88, we had 4 offices: Palos Verdes, Austin, London, Santa Cruz. And we had over 100 people. And we really needed to sell, because by the time we got to that point, Ryan had pretty much gotten way too conservative. And he didn't want to do anything. And so we finally were able to sell it to an Australian company, a wild entrepreneur, and I retired. We planned the rest of our life. We thought deeply what was important, and we decided there were 24 places in the world we both